Hi, this is Mary Greendale, and it's campaign season. Candidates are starting to be interviewed, and I want you to understand that when I interview these candidates, I am asking each candidate for an office the same questions. They get the questions in advance, they can prepare, and then we go through them. I have found this to be a good way to get a sense of how people respond to the questions in substance, and also how they differ between one candidate to another. The other thing, for candidates that are not opposed, I do not do interviews, but if they are brand new to town government, I do. And I do so because I believe that people have the right to know who's running their town government. And so we meet them, we talk to them, and we ask them a series of questions that's appropriate for their town office. So you will be able to watch these interviews at your leisure, and keep an eye out for them, and let's get going.
Welcome to Just Thinking. I'm Chryso Lawless, sitting in for Mary Greendale. Today, we are doing select board candidate interviews for the two people running for this position. Town election day is May 25th. This show is your opportunity to evaluate the substance of our candidates as they answer questions. Both people have received the same questions ahead of this interview, and each interview is approximately 30 minutes. Holliston Reporter will also be publishing statements for each candidate. I am pleased to welcome challenger Anne Louise Hanstad. Hi, Anne Louise.
Hi, Chryso. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being a challenger in this important race. Let's get started. Briefly, tell us about yourself. Your professional background, how long you lived in Holliston, and any other town offices that you've held.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I think this is a wonderful way to get people in touch with their candidate options, especially in a pandemic. So I do really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. So my name is Anne Louise Hanstad, and I have lived in town for 26 years. I think that now almost qualifies me as a townie, although I'm sure there were others who say, nope, not yet. I've raised 3 children who have attended the public schools since kindergarten. My husband, Ryland, is committed and dedicated to Holliston, where his business is located. He's a financial advisor. And together we're looking forward to a long future here. So that's sort of the personal side. On a professional note, gosh, I've been in business for, 25, 30 years now. I began my career in marketing and strategy following earning a degree at Wellesley College in economics and English literature, majored in both. I went on to get a graduate degree, an MBA at Dartmouth. So I think that prepared me well to enter the private sector and the business world. It also gave me an opportunity actually to do some consulting in the municipal world as well. Let's see, I have worked in strategy and management consulting, marketing and digital strategy. I have served at the executive level for a number of companies, especially in the technology sector. And I'm very familiar with the fiscal management that goes along with that. I've personally held the responsibility for budgets up to $35 million. So I have a good handle on what it takes to manage a financially sound budget and the resources required. And I took that with me into public service. I've served on the school committee for 9 years. And after 9 years and having graduated my last child last year, I am ready to pass that baton to any of the 5 candidates running. So I was delighted to see so many people willing to step up. And now I am ready to turn my advocacy and skills to the benefit of the community at large.
I guess that leads into this next question is, why specifically are you interested in this position?
Well, first and foremost, you don't run for any office unless you have a passion for the function, the role, and the commitment. But more importantly, with the select board, you have to love the community that you're living in and want to be able to give back to it. And I love Holliston. The day we set foot in this community, we knew it would be home. And you know, but every community needs leadership. And I think that gets to the next point. I believe I can make a difference and provide the leadership the community needs at this point in time. And this is really critical. This is probably the single most important thing for today. I think we're at an inflection point. We are at a very critical point in where this community is today. And I think we have to ask an important question. Do we want to remain a bedroom community, much like Sherburne, or something very different than that, that could look more like a Rentham? And those are two different answers. And I can't answer that, but at 15,000 citizens, we're growing. And the infrastructure required to run a community of this size is not insignificant, from the DPW, police, fire, schools, et cetera, sidewalks, you name it. There are a lot of priorities in town, and they can be expensive. The demographics of Holliston are changing, and I think that's really important. As we become increasingly more diverse, we have to ask ourselves, are we serving the needs of every single citizen? It's a question we ask ourselves in the schools and became the heart of our strategic plan. Are we serving every single student? And I want to take that question to the community. And the way to get there is leadership. Really excellent. It's leadership and collaboration. And I think I have the skills from my professional background, from my 9 years working on the budget for the schools, to handle and provide the leadership and collaboration for the town at large. So that's a key part of it. And I think finally,
I'm hearing, oh, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say finally, something I've observed over the last year and a half that probably triggered my decision to run this year and not wait another year after school committee, if you will. I want to see an improvement in the civil discourse in town and collaboration among the boards and departments at large. And I think that's lacking right now. So I think that's something I can really help contribute to. And it can't just happen among chairs. It has to happen among actual departments and boards together. And I could give you examples, but suffice it to say, the pandemic hasn't helped it in reality. I just think there needs to be a more open discourse.
I think maybe that leads into another question is, then what do you think are the three most important functions or duties of the select board? I hear you saying that leadership is very important for you, but what about the function of the board itself?
Yes, it's a big job. There are a lot of roles and responsibilities for a select board member and the board itself. There's some very critical, basic and obvious ones. So preparing the warrant. It happens twice a year, and the town cannot function if that warrant isn't prepared and sent to town meeting for debate and approval. So, clearly that's important. It's at the heart of the legislative process and direct democracy in town. So first and foremost in that regard. The select board also has the responsibility of appointing to town boards and offices. So those important appointments are critical. The TA, the treasurer, assessor, police, fire chief, et cetera, they really shape the government and decision-making priorities in town. And I have a lot of experience in hiring and evaluating professionals across the board. In fact, at the schools, I've participated in any number of search and hiring committees, not the least of which trying to hire a new superintendent in a matter of weeks when our last superintendent decided to resign just as the pandemic hit the schools. And we could have hired internally. There were a number of candidates interested, but I was probably one of the more vocal voices suggesting that we need to still understand what's out there and go for an external candidate. And I think we did an excellent job in hiring Dr. Kuska. So the third thing, and this is really something that people don't often think about, the impact that the select board can have. But the select board is responsible for entering into contracts for the town. And the reason I'm highlighting that as a critical third priority is because contracts can have a lasting impact, and the details and nature of those contracts, if they aren't well understood up front, you could be very unhappy with the outcome later on, and it could change the face of Holliston. So, you know, it's not just entering into those contracts. They do have to be renewed every 3 years, but whether it's a solar project that, you know, that is going to yield significant revenue for the town, but then, you know, like the one over by the rail trail, once that was in and the company frankly began violating the terms of the contract and clear cutting trees and impacting the environment, you know, those are things that really have to be clearly understood up front. And then the select board has responsibility for mitigation efforts to make sure nothing goes wrong once a contract is put in place. And so I think those are just some very significant things that the select board has responsibility for. And of course, that's in addition to the fiduciary responsibility they hold for all of the departments that are underneath them. Forgive me, lawnmower.
So let's go on. How about, what is the top change or improvement that you would like to see in place by the end of a 3-year term, your 3-year term, if you were elected?
You know, overarching one, when I really think about this, it's the development of a master plan, and it's probably the key reason that I'm running. This is something that we began discussion and in the context of capital, when I was sitting on the capital committee in town, and suddenly we were looking at tens of millions of dollars of potential infrastructure investments in town. And we worked with the Collins group to identify, you know, well, how do we prioritize all these things? And the schools, quite frankly, were the only department that had a comprehensive view of its own capital needs. And I think there was a lot of effort put in after that to try to get to the same level of specificity for other departments, but it left a critical open question, which was, what do we do next? How much goes into it? And is it needed? How important is it? And when you start asking those questions, it begs the question, why don't we have a master plan that guides the future vision, strategy, and priorities for the community? And I think it's been lacking. And I know there's a citizen's petition. I think it's going to be by Liz Greendale, and I'm delighted to see that. And I really hope the town gets behind that.
Actually, that's Mary's petition. She's putting that.
Mary's, because I thought Liz was, there's a Greendale in there. So I was really delighted to hear that Mary's putting that forward, but it does take someone with experience and leadership in that area to really make sure that that plan moves forward, that we're engaging the right resources to help marshal it forward, that the planning board has support, whatever committee is put on is representative of the community. And again, it gets back to the economic development question and where we want to be in a few years and how do we finance the things that matter most to us. And it has to be something informed by the community. You know, it's interesting, if you go to the Economic Development Committee's website for Holliston, and you're going down and you look at, there's a link for strategic plan. And I thought what I was going to find might have been actually the 1999 master plan for the community. But in fact, what you find is the school department's 2017 strategic plan, which I was a member of the committee and a key member of the school committee driving that strategy. So I not only have experience with it in the context of the schools, but I've done any number of consulting projects and in my own career led the strategic planning and development for a number of companies, especially on the technology front. So
Yeah, so I hear you saying that collaboration, leadership, and planning are very important. What do you have? What is your, and you may have already answered this, what is your biggest concern for Holliston over the next 10 years?
I think, as I said earlier, that we're at this inflection point where the growth of the community, and maybe I should even say it's not as fast growing as some communities, but the needs of the community are significant, and we're going to have to make some big decisions about how to invest in those priorities. Is it a new high school? Is it more road and infrastructure development? Is it, we have to look at our land use and decide, will we allocate more to projects like the solar project, et cetera? If a project like 555 isn't what the community wants, and it does have has raised some major concerns. I live on that side of town, so I share many of those concerns. But if that isn't what the community wants, then we need to find another way to drive revenue growth in the town to support the needs that the community wants to prioritize. And I think our Economic Development Committee has actually done a good job, but usually you have a strategic guidepost informing the direction in which they want to head. And that right now doesn't exist. The last one was done in 1999. So again, I think that's key. We have a lot of priorities that need to be sorted out. And I think we have to ask ourselves too, it's not just about building big buildings. It's the values of the community. When we look at this past year in particular, and we're doing this hard work in the schools, hopefully we'll have our budget approved and be able to hire a director of equity and social justice to address some of the deep systemic issues that exist throughout, education in general. I actually think that's something that the community at large should embrace and find a way to collaborate with the schools on some of the professional training that we hope to put in place.
This is a question about, it's more of a whatever question, because this may or may not happen, but there are COVID-related funding may be available to the town of Holliston. And there might be restrictions on its use, but regardless of restrictions, what would be your priorities on how to spend this money?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I would say this just to start: the full impact of the pandemic has yet to be felt. It's going to lag, and it's going to lag for years behind the recovery of the disease itself. And I think that's precisely why the Biden administration designed the American Rescue Plan, which is ARPA, to be a multi-year stimulus and recovery program. There are so many layers to this that it's complicated. So therein lies the challenge, from public health and safety to education and infrastructure. Those priorities are there. So caring for our senior citizens, I have witnessed firsthand now, in a very different way than if you had asked me this question a year, maybe even 2 years ago, what the challenges of healthcare and public safety look like for an elder citizen as I sit here with my 88-year-old mother with dementia downstairs. So I think when we talk about the priorities, it just has to be recognized that over 3 years, there's really a responsibility to address all of them as best we can. I have the greatest visibility right now into the school's needs, and they will be significant. I wouldn't want to tell anybody that they won't. To open the doors in September, it will look different than this past year, God willing, and we're going to commit to having a real shift in that experience to get students back on their feet. But I know the schools aren't the only part of the equation. So I think it's outside of that, leveraging ARPA for increased community-wide mental health is another thing that's a big priority of mine. So I would like to just chat about that a half a minute, even at the expense of another question. something that became evident to us, not only in the schools, to me personally, is that our students and citizens in the community at large are struggling with the impact of the pandemic, from isolation to job loss to family issues that have been magnified, et cetera. And that mental health crisis, I think it's real, it's critical, it's created equity issues, et cetera. And as a community, I think we have a moral obligation to provide a more comprehensive infrastructure, safety net, whatever you want to call it, to support every citizen in town. I began advocating for yet another psychologist in the schools because I'm so deeply concerned about the state of our students. And even now, we are facing some potentially significant out-of-district placements related to students who are struggling. But the reality is, you don't have mental health problems between 8 and 3 p.m. And in fact, it's actually almost the opposite. The crises often hit in those off hours when people are lonely. And what if you're, 25? What if you're an elder citizen who's been isolated from their family and hasn't been able to see anybody, and you're not comfortable with technology, and the best you've got is a phone call? We need to find a better way to reach out to those folks to help them find us. Youth and Family Services has been absolutely tremendous on this front. And I'd like to support them in doing more. I encouraged our superintendent to sit down with Jackie Weiner. Tina and I had began discussion on this, Tina Hine, several months ago, and she's been phenomenal in trying to move this forward. I don't know what it's going to look like, but when those ARPA funds are approved, I hope first and foremost on the top of the list, after caring for public health and safety, et cetera, that we can do something better with a more comprehensive community-wide mental health program.
Great. That sounds like an ambitious, but we have the framework in place with Youth and Family Services. So I think
we do. Chryso, ambition has never been my challenge. That may come from working with a number of startups, but I generally approach a situation by saying, okay, let's not figure out why it can't be done. Let's just try to figure out how we're going to get over those barriers. So I believe it can be done.
Absolutely. How would you measure your success after your first term?
The simplest answer to that question is if anyone wants to reelect you.
Of course, yeah. If you get reelected, that's definitely a positive.
Yeah, and small note on that, but when I first ran for school committee, I ran against a couple of other people who were running, and I was lucky enough the community chose to put me in the position. And then you kind of hope in the second election, maybe the third, that you get to slide on an uncontested election, not have to get those street signs out there. But in fact, I'm always up with a couple of other members. But anyway, the community has put me in the job 3 times in a row, so that was really nice. I think more seriously, it's really about staying in touch with the community and getting their feedback on a regular basis and figuring out with them through an open dialogue, are you doing the job and are you doing it well? I'm originally from New York. There's a big battle there. Secretly a Yankee fan, should I say that?
Well, we'll let that go.
I was living in Manhattan when Ed Koch was mayor, and I'm dating myself, but everybody loved him. He was like a celebrity. He was on Saturday Night Live half the time, but he was a good mayor. And one of the reasons is because he could connect with the people, and he often asked the question, how am I doing? And if we're not asking that question as elected officials and asking it often and communicating with people, that's a problem. I am always willing to take a phone call, listen to an email, or read an email and engage with people. And, sometimes that doesn't always mean their concerns can be addressed or within the role that I'm in. But I will try to advocate on behalf of our citizens. One of the things that, this comes from my marketing background. When you're a marketer and you're really trying to make sure that you're in touch with your customer base, is conducting regular sort of these omnibus sort of satisfaction surveys. It's just as simple as that. There are modern techniques. It
How
could
would
be
you do that in a town though? How would you bring that to a town level?
Yeah, so, well, let me just start with, if we get this master plan off the ground, there's absolutely a critical component of that I would imagine is a survey reaching out to the community at large. And the committee on the master plan should be able, as they're casting, the process and steps, et cetera, contemplate that. When we did the strategic plan for the schools, we did just that. And we used online survey tools because that's just how people connect. But you got to make sure you get a physical printed one into the hands of everybody else. There are a lot of different tools and ways to do this. It doesn't have to be like an onerous survey. Sometimes it's as simple as continually putting up a simple question that may pertain to specific issues. But the more you engage with a community, the more you will get information back on what matters and what matters most. Here's something we learned. People don't always come to school committee meetings. We know they watch through HCAT, but we could never quite manage to understand. Let me try to back up a little bit from that noise. We could never quite assess just how many people were watching through HCAT. Zoom has afforded us to see really how many people are engaging.
Right.
In fact, they're engaging frequently. And so I do think there's an opportunity for taking some things out of this pandemic and using them in a more informal way, coffee hours through Zoom, whatever it is, making it easier for working parents and professionals and elder people to engage with you is critical. And I don't think we have that right now.
Yeah, I can see that sort of happening, almost like a coffee hour with the select board,
Right.
that kind of thing. Yeah. So what on your tenure on the school committee, what are you most proud of those long 9 years you've been there? What are you most proud of?
You know what? It doesn't feel like 9 years. It's amazing. And I think that's probably a good thing. Although I think this last year feels like 9 years.
For everybody, for sure.
It really does. School committee is a labor of love each and every day. And I think the most important thing to remember is that there's 7 committee members and nothing gets done as an individual. So anything I tell you right now really is a function of working with my fellow committee members, okay? And that's important. You can't get anywhere on your own sailboat. You need someone else usually in the boat. I got the sail, you got the rudder. I am going to go back to that strategic plan. And the reason for that is that it was not only an extraordinary effort, it took many months. We involved the community at large, we involved administrators, educators, students, et cetera. That plan sets, it's the guidepost. It is the guidepost for everything that we do. And if you are a well-operating school district and your superintendent is on board and involved with all that from the outset, then that strategic plan becomes the thing that dictates, if you will, or as I said, guidepost, all of the priority values moving forward, from curriculum investments to student supports to community engagement to technology, which was a key thing. And I think it was a solid foundation to really set the schools over the last 5 years. We could not possibly have contemplated a pandemic, but interestingly, when the pandemic hit, there were elements of that strategic plan that we had, because of the plan, we were on the right course. And I will point to technology as one of them. There's often debate about how much technology you want in the schools. And I share that, right? So, do we want kindergartners running around with Chromebooks? No, not on a regular basis, God knows. But because we had put a plan in place and made a conscious investment and worked with the finance committee and town administrators to come up with a funding strategy annually to get the schools to a point where our students were operating in the 21st century. And from grades 6 through 12, we had students every student had access to a Chromebook when the pandemic hit, every one of them. We were in a far better place than most other districts to take on remote learning, much as we didn't want to.
And that's great. Yeah.
You know, so I do think the strategic plan is key. I have to go back to budget management as well. I have deep experience in the private sector on this, and I consider myself now extremely versed in municipal finance as well. And it's a tough one. God, there are tough choices there, but we have managed, honestly, to advocate for more funding for the schools. And that's my job right now. Over the years, over the last 9 years, then I was told I never thought possible, but and if you look at the data on that, it supports it, but not at the expense of other departments, and that's key. And we've done it prudently, but we have tried to support all of the needs of our students and our teachers, and I'm very sensitive to where we are in that right now. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that we're going to be able to do right by them. That's really where we are. So, and yet doing it without an override. Or if that's the answer, the town will take us there, and I think that's up to the town. That's up to the town, really, to figure out how we can get there. It's a tough moment in our history, but sound fiscal management, I think, is something that I can put a check mark in with the schools.
Okay, so what do you want voters to take away from our interview today? What's your final assessment of your running for select board?
I think, like schools, it's a little bit of labor of love, right? Like you want to do something because you care deeply about the future of your community and everybody in it, And I've had the benefit of 9 years of advocating for our students. And as I said, especially over this past year, I've gotten such an extraordinary glimpse, like hands-on experience with what's involved with serving senior citizens and elder care and everything from Medicaid and Medicare to, mental health support, et cetera. And I just feel like there's more that we can do, the mental health supports. I have the experience to go beyond now the schools and help guide the town to achieving some of its other goals. And I have my own thoughts and maybe where those goals might go, but ultimately we have to pull those out of the community, right? The community has to corral around a set of values and a set of priorities that matter to them. And as a select board member, and I love the fact that it's select board now, your responsibility is to answer the needs of your constituents, not to go in with your own set of goals. But I can do that because I have that skill set.
Thank you so much, Anne Louise. I really appreciate your frank and exciting answers. And we all hope that this interview will help the voters to make an informed decision when they go to the polls on May.
Yep, go to the polls. That's important.
That's right. That's the key, isn't it? Yes.
It is.
All right. So for Just Thinking, this is Chryso Lawless.